Okay, looks like we have a transition word, in fact, in other words, so let's read here. In a human behavioral study, psychologists tested the role of narcissism, the degree to which a person is self-involved and ignores the needs of those around them, in marital relationships. The study found that the greater the narcissism, the more likely it was to have been learned in youth. The correlation between environmental factors and narcissism was lower than that between narcissism and another factor study, bipolar disorder. Okay, so there's another relationship. They're making the claim that, you learn it, but then there's another claim that suggests it's related to an existing kind of condition or something of the sort. So what would be right here? In fact, the correlation, no, we're emphasizing a different point. We're referring to the relationship between narcissism and bipolar disorder. So we're not emphasizing in fact. In other words, we're not rephrasing something from the previous sentence. That's not right either. Granted, yeah. Granted, this is true. I still think that's the case, right? So there's kind of, again, it's granting that the first part is a statement of fact, the previous sentence, but there's something else going on here, and that's kind of what we use granted for. So that looks correct in this case. This is a tricky one, perhaps. I could see a lot of students choosing in fact, but granted is the best option. We see this more and more on the new exam. Let's check the last one. As a result, no, we're talking about a new type of relationship in this sentence from the previous one. So it's definitely not a resulting or cause-effect relationship. C, granted. 28, another transition question with its cliched imagery of suburban lawns and power lines. John Ashbery's 2004 poem, Ignorance of the Law is No Excuse, may seem barren terrain for critical analysis. Okay, so nothing there to criticize, no meat to it, I guess is the idea here. Blank, cultural critic Lauren Berlant finds fertile ground in just its first two stanzas. So wait, this person finds a lot of meat or useful content in the first two stanzas of the poem. So it's not barren terrain for her. So what would the relationship be? However, it's contrasting. She is not what you would expect, or she finds it not to be what you would expect. So it's not likewise. Nonetheless, cultural critic finds fertile ground. I think that's right. In turn, no, that kind of is afterward. That's kind of rephrasing. In other words, no, those aren't right. This is contrasting, nonetheless. The standard deviation of a random variable, sample, statistical population, dataset, or probability distribution x is the square root of the mean of the square of x minus the square of the mean of x. Whew, that's a mouthful. It is a measure of variation. So blanket is a measure of variation. What's the relationship? So this is going to be in other words. In other words, it is a measure of variation. That first part's like super complicated. So this is going to be, in other words, it is a measure of variation. I think that will be the right transition idea here. Likewise, no, it's not similarly. Nonetheless, it's not contrasting because no, it's not. In turn, again, that means kind of afterward, in turn, as a result. No, that is like, in other words, it is a measure of variation. In other words, that's correct. A tortoiseshell appears on the outside, protecting the turtle's body like armor. The shell is often incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton. A rigid outer casing like that of a crustacean or an insect, when in fact it is an endoskeleton, a part of the turtle's internal bone structure, like ribs or a spine. Okay, so that being said, well, what's the guess here? It would be a tortoiseshell protecting the turtle's body like armor. It's not contrasting. The shell is often incorrectly assumed to be exoskeleton. As a result, in other words, is this in other words again? I don't think we're exactly restating beforehand. So Let's see. That being said, the shell is often incorrectly. So it appears protecting the turtle's body. Well, nothing was said in that first sentence. So that being said, that it appears on the outside, it's often, I don't think that's right. However, tortoise shell appears on the outside, protecting, however, the shell, I thought contrasting. However, the shell is often incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton. Well, no, that's not really contrasting, actually, now that I think about it. Because it does contrast with the fact that it appears on the outside like armor, and it actually isn't. But this first part of the sentence, the shell is often incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton, that's a result of it appearing on the outside. This is not a contrasting between these two lines. There is an overall contrast here. So I think a lot of students are going to choose, however, I was thinking that myself, but not right here. Not between these two lines. For instance, is this an example? For instance, the shell is often incorrectly assumed. No, that's not an example of the previous sentence. Hence, I think it's a result. A tortoise shell appears on the outside, protecting the turtle's body. As a result, it's incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton. Why? Because it appears on the outside. And then we go into the transition, which is, well, in fact, it's actually internal bone structure. But that's not the right place for transition in the missing underline. D is the correct answer, cause and effect.